We'll get back to the podcast in a moment, but first, let me tell you about Grammarly. Your time and expertise are valuable, and with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster with AI prompts, tone suggestions, and more. And what's more, you can enjoy it with peace of mind with Grammarly's enterprise-grade security and its business model that doesn't sell your data. Experience the gold standard of responsible AI with Grammarly, a tool that 93% of professionals report helps them get more work done. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
Whistle while you work.
From Disney on March 21st, the magical tale
Snow White.
Snow White?
Snow White.
that started it all
I believe you're looking for me.
arrives in theaters.
Magic mirror on the wall.
Experience the Disney classic
Who's the fairest one of all?
like never before.
We haven't even been introduced yet.
Disney Snow White, only in theaters March 21st. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number one contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
The Athletic.
Hello and welcome to the Race Fantasy Podcast. If playing fantasy games enhances your enjoyment of sport, and especially of Formula One racing, then this is the show for you. I'm your host, Samarth Kanal, and I'm delighted to be joined by two of my colleagues at the race, Val Khorounzhiy and Josh Suttill, and a very special guest, fantasy expert Michael Urcinoli of Grid Rival. Welcome, everyone. Val, let's start with you. You play fantasy sports games. What is it about them that you enjoy?
Yeah, it's like a two-sided thing, isn't it? It's two specific aspects. I mean, apart from the fact that I'm an obsessive chronicler of sports, I would say the first side is we all like to talk about sports people, about teams, about, drivers, players, etc., and that sort of gives us a new way to discuss them with, like-minded individuals, etc. Not just, this guy I think will be good, but here's how I've used certain constraints of this game to show who I really believe in, what I really expect. And in a way, it also, especially for me as a sports writer, there's a certain temptation to prove to myself that actually I feel like I understand what's going on. I feel like I can do a good job of predicting who's going to be good, who's going to be productive. Can I prove it using like an actual sort of empirical sort of way of doing it? And for racing, I think specifically, this is maybe a weird thought, but, take either football, take association football or take American football, etc., and, those fantasy games. In association football, you can have like a dominating defensive midfielder, right, who controls the game from minute 1 to minute 90, like does everything, doesn't score, doesn't assist, so no points towards fantasy. His impact on the game, not really accounted for. In American football, you have a quarterback who leads an 80-yard touchdown drive, for instance, but at the 1-yard line, he stops, and the coach has the running back punch it in. The running back gets the touchdown points. In racing, you play fantasy racing, the guys who win are going to get you the results. The guys who perform, the performance, the outcome is so much more correlated to what you get. So I think that part of it I like a lot more here specifically.
Amazing. And Josh, is there anything, similar for you there? And also, do you want to pick on what Val said, that he's a chronicler and a sports writer? Or should we just skip that part?
I think we skip that part. I think I probably need a detailed explanation of what Val just said there, because it was completely lost on me. I would say that for me, the good thing is that it could be, the most boring Formula One race ever, but there'll always be something interesting with the Grid Rival, because I'll be thinking, oh, well, that's my driver. I hope he does well. Maybe he moves into from 12th to 11th. I mean, that's fantastic for me. Probably completely boring to everyone else. So it just adds an extra layer and basically guarantees that every race there's something exciting to watch for.
Amazing. And Michael, you work for Grid Rival, so you have a vested interest in people playing fantasy games. So why would you encourage people to play along at home, on their phones, wherever they are?
Yeah, the number one thing I would say is playing fantasy makes you feel more things about the sport that you love. So everyone has talked about, competing within fantasy sports, but it brings you a level of connection that you can't get unless you're involved with. For example, with Grid Rival, you're going to be rooting for drivers you'd not be normally rooting for. The success of Drive to Survive to kind of give you a connection to drivers who you weren't following before. Grid Rival is extending on that same thing by having you select those drivers to be a part of your team to win you points and be able to compete against, friends, family, and strangers. So, fantasy sports has worked for decades in traditional sports. And on the motorsports side, it has been incredibly underserved. So that's what we set out to do, was build a fantasy platform for motorsports that was special and unique to motorsports. And it's far easier than traditional fantasy sports, but at the same time, it's not set it and forget it for the entire season with your favorite drivers. You're in it week to week. You're thinking about F1 outside of the times cars are on track in a way you would never be able to do unless you were playing a game like this.
Bang on, right? Yeah, no, exactly. So let's go into specifics. Unsurprisingly, given who one of our guests is, the specific fantasy game we're going to be discussing today is Grid Rival's contracts-based F1 game, which you can find by downloading the Grid Rival app from your app store of choice. We genuinely think this is the best fantasy F1 game out there, especially for more invested and knowledgeable fans who want a deeper gameplay experience. That's why we put our name to a Grid Rival League, and we'd love for all of you listening to join it and play along with us. On this episode, we're going to discuss how you can play the game, chat about strategy and tactics, and run through the prices of each car and driver to discuss where the value lies. After that, we'll enter the trash-talking section of the podcast as myself, Josh, and Val reveal the teams we picked, and I'll explain why I've got it right and why they've got it so very wrong. So let's get started, shall we? So the obvious starting point is to discuss how to play the game. So, Michael, for the uninitiated, can you give us a very quick overview of Grid Rival's most popular F1 game? Because the premise is slightly different and we think more interesting compared to some more F1 fantasy games, isn't it?
Yeah, would totally agree. So as Samarth said, it's a contracts game. So what you're basically doing is you're going to set a lineup of 5 drivers and 1 constructor with a $100 million team budget. With that team budget and signing those drivers, you'll be signing them to contract lengths between 1 and 5 races long. So you'll have that driver on your team for those number of races. As the drivers compete through those events, you will earn fantasy points and also earn more or less contract value as the drivers perform or do not perform. And at the end of that contract, you then reap the reward or live with the regret of that decision when you come out of it with more or less money. I say the best way to think about it is sort of like the stock market. Your team principal investing in these drivers for their contract lengths. You want to buy low, sell high, reap the rewards, and fantasy points are basically like the earnings report where the action really comes out and has a result on your team.
So there's an important point there that, we should probably bring to the fore. The highest finishing driver in a race is not always the one who scores the most points, because there are multiple factors that enable a driver to accumulate points over a race weekend. So, Michael, can you explain more how points are awarded to teams and drivers?
Totally. So the largest amount of points does come from the race finish position. So if you don't listen to the next 60 seconds of what I have to say, you could still have a very, very competitive team if you have a good ability of just predicting the race finish positions for drivers, and that dictates the team that you create. So the most amount of points are for race finish position. Then we have quali position. So you're awarded points for your finishing position for quali. We have overtake points, which are defined as the net positions gained between your quali position and your race finish position. So if you have 2 overtakes, if you quali in third and win the race, you're going to get overtake points for those 2 extra positions. improvement points. So improvement points are really there for your midfielders and backmarkers who have a really, really good race result for that weekend. So we take an 8-race average of their finish positions, and any number of positions that they finish above that position or earns them extra points. So if you take a specific example of Brazil last year with Ocon and Gasly's double podium, they earned tons of improvement points for that event because there were midfielders who ended up on the podium. You also have beating teammate points. We all know in F1, the closest competition that you have is your teammate. So we give points for that. If you beat your teammate, you're the best on your team, you're going to get additional points. And then lastly is completion points, because we all know that sometimes just finishing the race is a win, kind of like Brazil last year. So the more percent complete of the race you get through, the more points you're awarded. So that's how the fantasy points are earned throughout the event weekend, I should say. And we also do award points for sprint races.
Awesome. So let's get into the details of building a team. So in the F1 game, you have to choose 5 drivers and 1 constructor from a budget of $100 million. Michael, how did you go about pricing the teams and drivers?
So pricing the teams and drivers is a data-intensive process. So we look at past performance, expected future performance, and kind of come up with a driver ranking of what we believe to be an accurate starting rank for the driver. And then our salaries are actually evenly distributed and based off of a maximum salary for that position. So if you take, for example, right now, Max Verstappen's the highest priced driver in the game at $30 million. The salary max for first position is $33 million. So if Max is the highest fantasy point scorer for Australia, he actually does have contract value upside to keep going up. So none of the positions are already at their contract max. Consistency will be rewarded with value here as well. So yeah, now I'm sure as we go through the drivers, we're going to talk about the specifics of who's where and why, which I can give some context for.
No, I love the depth and nuance of all of this. So, let's talk about it. If you have a budget of 100 million, straight away strategy comes into play, doesn't it? Because you're signing a driver, you have to decide how many races to sign them for, from 1 race to 5 races. So, Val, this is a really exciting part of the gameplay, isn't it? Especially once a driver's contract expires, you have to wait 1 race before you can sign them to a new contract.
Yeah, that's exactly the best part, because I think that it makes you rotate your lineup in certain ways. Obviously, you decide how you rotate it. You could go for, clean sweep changes. You could go for presumably a strategy where you just take a 1-race beating and then return to your favorite team. I guess you could also do that, but you could look holistically at the calendar. You could look at the upcoming races. I guess you could look at specific even tracks. Like, for instance, every year, I imagine you would want Williams at Monza, Williams at the sort of low downforce type of tracks, for example. But then you need to think ahead. You need to bake in the contract flexibility, because you don't want to be paying because you can get out of contracts early, but that costs you precious budget that you would want to use going forward, potentially on building the lineup that you want, the perfect lineup for that round. And if you've used up too much of that extra budget paying out, early contract terminations, you can't do it. So that's a really fun part of it, because it means you can't just have people setting up like 500 teams of just static lineups and never changing them, which sometimes happens in certain other games.
Michael, there's another tactical element to driver contracts, isn't there? Because you can actually win extra budget and funding if a driver performs well, can't you?
Yeah. So let's take. I like to use specific examples. Okay. So let's go to the bottom of the grid real quick. I think So Bortoleto. Bortoleto is priced at 3.4 million pounds in the game right now. If you think Bortoleto is underpriced at 3.4 million, and you sign Bortoleto to a 5-race contract, and Bortoleto does a really good job in earning fantasy points in 5 races, he could be worth 6, 7, 8, 9 million pounds. So when that contract expires, that budget then comes back to you as money to then sign another driver. So if you rode the kind of gravy train that Bortoleto gave you during those 5 races, you benefit from it. But the opposite is also true. If you then take the flip side, sign Max as a DNF in Australia, and you signed a 1-race contract, you got no fantasy points and lost $2 million or 2 million pounds of Max's contract, because he'll likely have the maximum drop, which is $2 million.
And Josh, I'm coming to you now. This is a really crucial bit of gameplay, isn't it?
Yeah, I was thinking back to 2023 at the start. I had this massive bounce because I saw that Aston Martin were doing really well in testing and kind of felt like they were a bit undervalued. I filled up the team with Alonso, Stroll, Aston Martin and got this incredible bounce, which went nowhere as the season went on, and I went very downhill after that. But that was a great choice and it kind of rewards that if you're really paying attention, you can spot, like Michael said, those drivers and teams you think are undervalued and really cash in. Mm-hmm. And then after that, obviously, you get the benefit of going forward with more budget. The other thing you can do is kind of be the kind of Helmut Marko, Flavio Briatore kind as well. and you know, if you've realised you've made a mistake by signing a driver who's underperforming, you know, there's 5 races, you maybe 1 race into that 5-race contract, you know, you can just pay to basically buy them off, to release them and get a better performing driver in your lineup, which I think we've probably all sat at home and thought, why isn't this team dropping a driver? Well, you know, now you can in this regard, and there's not any of the personal consequences of doing so in the real world, so it feels much better. So yeah, that's something I'm going to be keeping a close eye on this year, and I don't think any of us are going to be afraid to do that if we have to.
Yeah, well put, Josh. And Val, the other tactical thing you can do with your lineup is choose one driver as a talent driver, and the talent driver scores double points. Now, not all drivers are eligible as talent drivers. They have to be under a certain salary threshold, but it's another intriguing tactical choice, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the current threshold is, I believe, 18 million, or at least last I checked, it was somewhere there, which basically cuts you off at specifically the midfield option. So none of the top 14 guys you can get as double pointers, which I think what it does do is it encourages you to pay attention to the midfield. It means you can't quite basically stack your lineup with front runners and then go super, super cheap for the others just to sort of squeak it under the budget limit. You have to really try to find that additive value specifically among the midfielders. And it is quite also an interesting choice to make, to try to read that insane F1 midfield. I don't think the talent driver choice is particularly hard right now, but it is at some points in the season. I don't think it's difficult now. I think it is difficult.
Okay, I'll hold you to that in a second. Okay. Josh, without revealing who it is, how much time did you spend agonizing over your talent driver choice?
Oh, well, I sort of agree with Val. If we pick the same driver, it took me about 2 seconds. I thought, this guy, he's a team leader in a midfield team that's done really well in testing. He's sawn off a very, bitter intra-team feud. But if you haven't got it by now, I'll be very surprised. But that's just a little hint.
Got it.
Of who I picked.
Oh, I'm really, really hoping I've got it right. Michael, before we discuss the teams we picked for the season opener in Australia, what are some of the most common mistakes first-time players make?
Oh, number one is not watching the game guide. So when you join a league, at the top of the league, there is a big banner that says view the game guides. So we have a collection of just a handful, 3 or 4 like 90-second videos that explain everything. And there is a 100% correlation in the data of how well you perform in the game to how, if you watch the game guides or not. So it's a direct correlation. So I would say the 2 things is that you'll see of people who are outperforming in their leagues. They have 2 things. They watch the game guide and they have app notifications turned on so they don't forget to set a lineup when lockdown for China is a super different time for you than what lockdown for Monza is. So those are the 2 biggest mistakes we definitely see being made by players, costing them lots of valuable points. And then I would say the second is, in your team selection, you really have to think about the value. You have to think, I only have $100 million. Where is the best place to spend it? And that might not be with your favorite driver. So that's like a hump that new players definitely have to get over in signing their drivers for the first time. And I actually tell people, especially new players, don't overthink this. It doesn't matter if you play this game like chess or checkers. This is racing. You're going to get wrecked at some point, right? So don't overthink it. Think about the race finish position, because that scores you the most amount of main points. And then if they have a great race finish position, likely all of the extra bonus points will also be there as well. So try and have fun and don't overthink it. And the last thing I would say is play in multiple leagues. That's not just me saying hey, you should increase your engagement on the app. if you only play in one season, you're only testing out one strategy. So last season, I played in 3 F1 leagues competitively with different driver selections for each league. And all 3 of them had great results on the global leaderboard with completely different lineup selections, and it was a completely different experience to think about. So if you play in multiple leagues, you gain a lot more experience. Every race that you race, you get 2 races worth of experience on the game.
Those are great tips. I don't know where my notebook is actually.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll listen to this later. Michael, just before, I'm itching to know your teams. But Michael, are there any other tactical or strategic levers in the game that we haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So I would say, are we going to go into kind of like pro tips, like from the jump? Would that help?
Let's do it.
Okay. So one pro tip that I encourage new players to look at is the difference between the teammates and their value. They're in almost identical vehicles. So the price difference is what we're saying the skill difference is, for the most part. How wrong are we? If you could capitalize on that, you're going to have a very, very favorable early result. So, for example, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are about 4 million pounds difference in price. Oscar might not overtake Norris in terms of total driver performance, but if he can close that gap, you could ride that value wave up. So your net instinct is going to say, oh, I want Lando Norris. But you might want to look at Oscar Piastri and say, I think I could make contract value here. I think I can get a very, very similar amount of points and also make money on this contract. So I love to look at the differences of the valuations of it. Some of them are very wide. There's some very wide valuations there, and that's done purposely.
Verstappen and Lawson, isn't it? There's a huge gap between Verstappen and Lawson. If you back yourself that Lawson's going to do it, then I think you could be in for a big profit there. Don't forget, Sergio Perez was extremely close to Verstappen in the first few races of their time together. It wasn't later on, but in those first few races he was. So if you think Lawson could do the same, I think he's a bit of a underrated pick.
I would not disagree.
Didn't choose him, but there's a free tip.
Oh, spoilers. All right. I can't put it off. Let's do it. Let's discuss the teams we picked. Val, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you talk us through your team and the thinking behind it?
Before that, I just want to say I love the fact that Josh offered a free tip of a driver he didn't use. That's fantastic. That's worth a lot, isn't it? Yeah,
money where your mouth is.
Actually, I like the part with the leagues and the multiple teams. I think is very cool because for one of them, I just genuinely looked at the adoption percentages and I was like, I want to see how the hive mind does. I want to just pick the lineup of the most picked drivers and see if that gets me somewhere. I didn't do that for this league. For this league, I decided to be creative. I tried to be. Maybe this is a stupid reference, but Billy Bean from Moneyball. I tried to feel like I don't have enough money and I need to get excess value on basically everything, and I ended up not spending 11 million that I had. So, all right, let's go. Driver 1, Lando Norris. Driver 2, Charles Leclerc. Driver 3, Carlos Sainz. That is the talent driver. Driver 4, Lance Stroll. Driver 5, Jack Doohan. Team Alpine. And that's 89 million spent, 11 million in the bank.
Okay, and who was your talent driver there?
Carlos Sainz.
Right. Okay, Josh, come on. What do you think of Val's team? And is that the right talent driver?
Oh, interesting. Not the talent driver that I thought we meant. I think we're on very different wavelengths earlier, which is fair enough. I think Sainz is a decent pick. Doohan's the one that stuck out to me straight away. Maybe Val, you could just explain your thinking a bit more on that one.
Yeah, let me just check the price very quickly because he's a guy who, Alpine has had a pretty good preseason, right? And I think Doohan, he didn't have the best of the Abu Dhabi weekends, the single weekend that he's had so far in relief of Esteban Ocon last year. But there were glimpses of him being decently close to Gasly in pace when he puts it all together to Pierre Gasly. And in the race, he still finished okay and he gained a lot of positions relative. So if he underperforms under qualifying, I think he's going to move forward in races. And if he does perform in qualifying, that he's surplus value anyway, he costs like 5 million. I think 5 million, this is me trying to moneyball. I think 5 million undervalues any driver in the Alpine. That's my feeling personally right now because I think they've looked pretty good in the preseason. So I was like, I can't. This doesn't even get me to the value. I still have 11 more million to spend, but I can't. I'm bargain hunting. I can't not get him. I need the extra cash that can potentially bring me.
So I asked Val for his. We didn't discuss our lineups before. The only thing I asked him was how much money do you have at the end of the lineup, and you said, like you said 11 million. So Michael, Does that surprise you as a strategy? Because that just it baffles me that you'd have all that excess kind of left over at the end.
Very much so, yes. So you don't need to spend all of it, but you should spend as much of it as you can. Otherwise, you might be leaving points on the table. So yes. A mistake that we do see some players make who hear us talk about value and how important value is important in the beginning part of the season. So you build your bank balance so that it can carry you through the whole season to build your lineup as drivers increase in value. Also, the more money you have, the less you actually have to worry about contract values, because you could just pay the drop fee because you have the money and you could keep assembling a great lineup every single week. So I'm not going to say it's wrong because it's the start of the season. Anything could happen. But typically, once you're north of leaving $5 or $6 million pounds on the table in the game, you might be sacrificing points.
Okay.
Yeah, honestly, Michael, I promise that's very much at the forefront of my thinking, and I'm kind of expecting to take a bit of a bath in Bahrain, in Australia, in whatever the second round of the season is.
China.
I expect to leave a few points on the table because I've specifically deliberately underspent on the team. But I think that once those contracts run out, and they should run out pretty quickly, I can then use that extra value to basically really front load the lineups with cars and teams that I have a better idea of being good now, because preseason only tells you so much. So I'm trying to build like a war chest of money to then give it a go. And to be fair, I realize completely that's potentially stupid and mathematically impossible, but I really I saw it and I was like, I gotta give this a go.
Okay, all right. Val with the war chest then. All right, Josh, your team?
Yeah, I don't need to criticize Val's lineup because he's done that all himself, I guess. So he's kind of admitted that he's got a
yeah. You kind of roasted yourself there, but
and I got the expert Michael to chip in as well. So yeah, we'll consider Val's lineup defeated for now, but let's see. Yeah, so my lineup actually starts off quite similar. So I've also gone for Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc, mainly because I think those two are going to be the title contenders this year. Extremely early to say. That was just my hunch, and slightly cheaper than Verstappen. Which is what kind of put me off going for him for now. I've gone for Pierre Gasly and Carlos Sainz. Again, two people I think are going to be the forefront of the midfield. I've gone Gasly as my star driver. Incredible form at the end of last year. I can just see him continuing that. To be honest, it was a toss-up between Gasly and Sainz. I can imagine both of them are going to be at the front. And then I've gone for the bargain option we discussed earlier, which was Bortoleto, because I think he is going to hopefully increase his value a lot. I've actually only put him in for 2 races. So when Michael was saying after 5 races, yeah, that's probably a bit smarter. But I think 2 races is going to be enough. I'm hoping he's going to have a real instant impact. And then I can get a decent amount of cash from him after the first 2 races. And for my team, I've gone for Alpine as well. I guess, Michael, we could say kind of what was the thinking of putting Alpine 9th, because that's kind of been a popular choice for me and Val so far.
It is, yeah. So Alpine is 9th at 7.6 million. Alpine had a very tumultuous season last year in terms of performance and car development. They ended the season strong, but if you're looking at what I would consider to be the best cars of the backfield, it is Williams, Racing Bulls, and Alpine. I think Sauber is a drop off from those 3. And the price difference between them is actually not that big. So what you want to look at is the driver pairing when we're looking at the constructor value. So the driver pairing of Sainz and Albon is a very strong driver pairing for a back marker team. It is in my opinion, the strongest driver pairing for a back marker team. So that's why they're in 7th. I have no poor opinions of Ocon and Gasly. I actually play them a lot in the game because they are often underpriced and have outsized performance. But I think where the car was at the end of last season, where the drivers are, they are the bottom of the 3 back marker cars that I would consider signing at the start of the season. But I do think the way it's designed, Williams, Racing Bulls, and Alpine all have upside at the start of the season, in my opinion. It's just going to be which one of those teams are the best of those 3. Because I think that's where the value is right now on the constructors. It's between Williams, Racing Bulls, and Alpine. One of them is going to have an outsized result relative to the other 2. And you guys are going with Alpine.
For what it's worth, Williams is apparently the most adopted team in our league, in the race league, at 26%. And Alpine's like 3rd. And Racing Bulls, they don't share your optimism so much, and I gotta say, neither do I. I'm not totally convinced by them, but that's the joy of this is being wrong.
Which I'm sure you will be quite a lot. But before that, can you just give us your thoughts on Josh's team, Val?
It's what a sane person would do. So yeah, I think so. I don't know about like Gasly was such a certain choice over Sainz. And again, I've looked at the percentages of adoption because I'm insane. Sainz is like 60% adoption. He is the most popular choice in the race league by like an enormous margin. Nobody else clears 40, no team, no driver, but Sainz is at 60. And I can totally see why, but it's probably a bit of a hangover of an elite team driver coming down. So maybe there's a feeling that he'll bring some of that elite sheen to Williams from Ferrari. But I don't know. I would have, even if I had Gasly in the lineup, he'd still be my talent pick just because. I don't know, actually. I'm starting to doubt it a little bit.
Yeah,
Josh's lineup is good.
This is what happens.
Josh's lineup is good. I like it. I also do think that potentially he chose Bortoleto just because he had to make the 100.
No.
So-
Okay. Bortoleto, his mentality is super impressive. I can see him doing really well. Completely impressed. I'll be completely honest. I love single seaters and kind of the junior ladder and stuff and following it. Completely not on my radar a few years ago. Really took me by surprise. I think did a fantastic job. I think he's got a really strong mentality, and he's going to need it, right? Like Michael said, that Sauber is not looking good. So yeah.
It's not a diss on Bortoleto for my part. I don't know about the Sauber.
And it's like the reliability thing, right? I'm sure a few years ago, playing this game, you've got more chance that Bortoleto is going to get like an 11th or 12th just from kind of finishing. It's kind of less likely now, so maybe trickier, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, good reasons. All right, I'm kind of nervous now because here's my team.
Here we go.
I genuinely am nervous. I was all confident before, but... Okay, I've got Norris. I've got Antonelli. I've got Behrman as my talent driver. I've got Hulkenberg and Doohan. And then Red Bull as my constructor. Oof. And just a disclaimer, right? I changed it just before this podcast. Just before we recorded, I had a major panic and then changed it. So I don't know what I was thinking, but just go for it.
So what had you had before then? What was the big last minute change?
I went for Gasly as the talent driver. I thought that's the sensible pick, right? And then I was like, but he's taking so much of my budget up. What if I sell him and I sell another driver and I get Antonelli instead? Because that's a good team and Antonelli could surprise. And now I'm like, I should be going back on this. This is scary. This is new territory for me. Don't make that face.
No, we're supposed to roast each other, right? But honestly, Antonelli I think is a great pick. I think very, very good. I had him penciled in as a must for most of it, and then just for me, kind of the money didn't work out really. I think with that Mercedes at the start of the season, you're looking like it. The only issue is that obviously the scoring system penalizes drivers who don't make the finish. And you would fear that with rookies, right? Obviously, rookies tend to DNF. That's Formula One. That it happens, and team bosses accept it, and they go, "That's fine." In the first year that happens. But I think otherwise, the floor for Antonelli is like an 8th place finish, and the way he's valued, that's a high floor relative to his value, I would say.
Yeah. So Antonelli's price is the most contested price in the app right now among the fans in terms of who's talking about what price. Most people are saying Antonelli's overpriced at $20.2 million. I disagree. I think he's accurately priced for an okay selection for two reasons. One, everyone's like, okay, Antonelli's a rookie. He's Lewis Hamilton's replacement. Like, that's how you have to talk about Antonelli. That's how Mercedes is talking about Antonelli. He's Lewis Hamilton's replacement. He's not just any rookie. So Antonelli is the lowest priced driver of a top performing vehicle. He's the lowest of the top. So right there's a potential for value for sure. Last season, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton both held their value above 20 million pretty much the whole season. Lewis had a couple of DNFs that I think might have brought him below it, but there's a consistency there that if Antonelli can continue on the consistency of the driver pairing of Lewis and Russell, there's not much downside, and there is a little bit of upside with a good points differential. Whereas Alonso is at 18.8 million. Everyone on the app right now is talking about pricing between Antonelli and Alonso. We actually have a saying internal at Grid Rival called the Alonso problem, because Alonso constantly goes between talent driver eligible under 18 million and not talent driver eligible above 18 million. And the problem that causes is the players have to drop Alonso because they want him as talent driver, but they never want him as the highest priced driver outside of talent driver range. That's where Antonelli fits in. So that's why Antonelli's 20 and Alonso is 18.8. So I would actually not play Alonso at all for the first race, hoping for not, love Alonso. It's hard having this job sometimes because like I think about F1 like through the lens of the game more than I think about my love of the sport sometimes. But Alonso is 800,000 pounds away from being talent driver eligible, and that's when I want him on my team, and that's not Australia.
Can I say something? I think Alonso's right now the worst contract on the game. And
yes.
That even if he was talent driver eligible, I actually still would not want him.
Yeah.
Because the Aston has looked so shaky in the preseason and sounds very, very downbeat. And the difference in value between him and Stroll is massive, and I think it is reflective of their obviously like historical records in F1, but because of how limited the Aston might be, I don't think you're going to get that back in points value where they run. And also because Lance Stroll, one important part of his skill set is he's a first lap savant. So he is consistently, even though his qualifying is shaky, he is consistently going to make up a bit of that, I think, through racecraft. At least that's my general recollection. Didn't pick him because Aston... no, I did pick him.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I swear you picked him.
That's why I'm so convincing.
He was a good pick.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've just roasted yourself again. Josh, coming to you, any last thoughts on my team, as it were?
Well, I would repeat that Antonelli is an absolute star choice. Unfortunately, it's a star choice in a complete pile of rubbish, Samarth, unfortunately. Let's just talk me through a couple of bits, okay? Let's talk about a team. Right, you've gone for Red Bull, who are more expensive than Mercedes, and they've had a really shaky preseason. What is happening there? And also Hulkenberg. Okay, if we're doing a driver rankings, if it says Straw's driver rankings, okay, Hulkenberg's probably going to be quite high because he'll do a great job. But is that really going to mean anything in the worst car compared to Bortoleto, who is way cheaper and surely not going to be that far off him? So, could you just explain those two, please?
No, yeah, that was the quick change that I made before this podcast, and I am going to have to go back on it now. This is just embarrassing. You know what? Before I just start stuttering and trying to defend myself, Michael, do you think we've done a good job? And which of our three teams is good? And also, any more tips for us?
Yeah, well, no one knows what a good lineup is for the first race unless they have a crystal ball, right? I tell people, don't put too much stock in testing. There's so many false hopes and false doubts that occur in testing. So really free practice is where you actually start to see some things shake out. So I would tell people like set a safety lineup right now. Set a lineup of like what you think will work. This way, if you get distracted and you forget to set your lineup, you don't miss the first race of the season, right? So set your safety lineup now. And then as we get to free practice sessions, that's when you want to be making those fine-tune adjustments to your lineup because you'll see a little bit more get shaken out at that point. But even still, no one saw Sauber's lug nut problem during practice. That only came out in the race last season, right? So they were looking like the car was faster than it ended the season as, which I think was true, but then they couldn't do a pit stop. So, there's a lot of surprises that come out in the first race of the season. So I wouldn't say I have a favorite lineup, but I think there were some picks there that between everyone's lineups, which I think were really, really smart. And there were some ones that I think could be better.
Anyway, I cannot wait to see which one of us comes out on top after Australia. And remember, you can play along with us. Just download the Grid Rival app from your app store of choice, and in the league section, search for the Race League. It's free to join and so much fun. There's so much nuance, so much depth. So thank you to Michael, thank you to Val, thank you to Josh for joining me for this episode of the Race Fantasy Podcast. And thanks to you for listening. All that's left for me is to say happy gaming, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
The Athletic.